Alex, the pharmacy's resident shelf stacker and walking meme factory, was half-heartedly tossing bottles of shampoo onto a high shelf, whilst silently miming the words to Gwen Stefani's Hollaback Girl. His arms reaching awkwardly as he tried to balance on his tiptoes and shake his hips to the beat at the same time. He'd been at this job for about 3 months, ever since he dropped out of school, though no one really knew why. He probably couldn't even explain it if you asked. At 17, he was already taller than most of the adults in the store, about 5'10", but still looked like he hadn't quite grown into his body. His brown hair was cut into a perfect broccoli shape, a sad attempt at being trendy. He called it the Giga Chad look and swore it made him look like drip, or whatever that meant. "Skibbity toilet, bro," Alex yelled across the store at his co-worker Mrs. Turnbull, an older woman, as she struggled to pull out a massive carton of toothpaste from the stockroom. After removing one earbud from his ear, he attempted to sound more intellectual. "I'm telling you, the way the world's going, we all gotta get that Ohio Riz if we want to survive the unleashing." The woman looked at him like he had just spoken in ancient hieroglyphs, which, honestly, wasn't too far off. Alex, for all his energy and enthusiasm, had a knack for picking up the latest trends, but never fully grasped what any of them actually meant. He would sprinkle phrases like Sigma grind set, no cap, and big dub into every conversation, whether they made sense or not. He also clearly had a knack for commenting on social and political controversies he knew nothing about. His thoughts always seemed to be stuck on the confusing, rising political tension in the country. Everywhere he went, it felt like the Father's Council was suffocating the air. Alex leaned against the shelf, pretending to stack shampoo bottles while Mrs. Turnbull muttered under her breath. Posters lined the pharmacy's walls, smiling families, women holding babies, slogans like "Strength through tradition." Alex barely noticed them anymore, but sometimes he wondered how much of that strength came from fear. His dad couldn't stop talking about the council's promises, about how they'd restored order, made men the protectors, and women. Well, women would be protected. He could barely understand the whole thing. But one thing was clear: men lead, and women should fall in line. There was talk in the news about the new restrictions on reproductive rights. They'd successfully closed the last private abortion clinic as of last week. He'd heard in passing that it was tightening its grip on women's freedoms, but his dad said it was the godly thing to do. Alex tried not to pay much attention to the details. It was just another thing that didn't affect him, right? He could, more often than not, escape his dad's ramblings at home. At work, on the other hand, he was always dragged headfirst into the conversation, and it was harder to ignore. Mrs. Turnbull, for one, wasn't exactly shy about expressing her feelings on the matter. She had been talking about the recent regulations that had passed, about how women were being forced to jump through hoops for basic healthcare. "Did you hear what they're doing about emergency contraception, Alex?" Mrs. Turnbull had asked one day while stocking the shelves next to him. She didn't wait for an answer, her voice low but firm. "They're making the girls ask permission from their partners now. I mean, what on earth? They have the country convinced the morning-after pill is a personal attack on a man's character. Can you believe it? They've managed to offend husbands into producing more children now. I'm telling you, boy, it's all about control, about making women dependent. I'm tired of seeing it. This affects you too, child. Are you listening?" Alex nodded, pretending to care, but his mind was elsewhere. He'd overheard similar conversations from his dad about how women didn't deserve to have access to contraception, how they were trying to dodge responsibility for their actions. He remembered sitting on the top of his stairs one evening, listening to his dad rant to his friends about how termination was a direct attack on a man's masculinity. According to his dad, aborting their seed was the ultimate betrayal, second only to infidelity. It wasn't just rhetoric. His dad preached it like a sermon. "Schrödinger's abortion," he'd said, the phrase echoing in Alex's mind like a cruel joke. "Where there's a baby and no baby at the same time. A women's loophole that's getting out of hand." Alex didn't understand half of what his dad was saying, but the part about men's power and women's place stuck with him. He had been raised to believe it. It was the natural order of things, right? The Father's counsel was shaping everything, even the smallest aspects of society. Women would have to present identification when picking up birth control, and have a husband present when ordering emergency contraception, and security cameras were being installed in pharmacies to keep track of who was buying what. No one really talked about it, but the message was clear: control. Control over women's bodies, their choices, and their futures. He couldn't fully wrap his head around what was being done. It did seem a bit harsh, but he wouldn't dare vocalize that to any bloke he knew. Alex shook off the thought and jammed his earbud back in, the music kicking back in as Gwen's soundtrack blared through him again. "Banana," he sang, a little too loud for the pharmacy's quiet aisles. He winced, then shrugged, continuing to rummage through the boxes, oblivious to how much noise he was making. "I don't think so, Alex," Mrs. Turnbull bellowed from behind the till. "That ridiculously giant jumper is not part of your uniform, and for goodness sake, that is not how you spell banana." Alex adjusted his hoodie with an exaggerated tug, grinning sheepishly. "Mrs. T, it's the look, you know. Shows I'm serious about important stuff," sounding self-assured as he twisted the garment around, making the "I paused my riz to be here" print visible to her. He glanced around as he sauntered towards the counter, dropping his voice as if he were about to share insider information. "So, about this whole unleashing thing, gotta say, I reckon it's gonna be wild. Like, women can do, whatever they feel like, yeah?" He cleared his throat, unsure of himself but pushing on. "Maybe you ladies'll go grab some makeup or, I don't know, like, take a whole shelf of tampons or something, real skibidi stuff, right?" Mrs. Turnbull didn't even blink, arms folded tight across her chest. "Is that what you think women want, Alex? Some free makeup and a day to act like, what, teenagers?" "Well, Alex hesitated, scratching his neck. He could feel the heat rising to his cheeks and hoped she wouldn't notice. He wanted to explain himself, to tell her he didn't think that way, but the words wouldn't come out right. "No cap, Mrs. T. Just, it's just time to collect that Farnham tax, yeah?" She stared him down, a look of exasperation mixed with something softer, almost pitying. "Alex, please remove the jumper and try stacking those shelves with a little more quiet, all right? And maybe, just maybe, give some thought to what real freedom actually means to people." Alex lowered his eyes, a mumble of, "Yeah, okay," escaping as he turned back to the shelves, Mrs. Turnbull's words echoing uncomfortably in his mind. What real freedom actually means to people? Maybe she didn't know what freedom meant, he thought defiantly, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. His dad was always drumming it into him how feeble women were, how they were lucky, really, to live in a world where men shouldered all the burdens. "It's a man's job to do the hard work and provide," his dad would say, usually over the dinner that his mum had made, his voice always taking on that familiar, proud edge. "All they have to do is make the kids and keep the house, and they still have the cheek to whine. Ungrateful, the lot of them." Alex could still hear those words, almost like a chant he'd memorized by heart. A thought gnawed at him. Wouldn't that make women freer than us? He wondered, glancing around the quiet pharmacy. Mrs. Turnbull, stubborn as she was about her rules, had come in every day since he'd started here, even though she wasn't even the manager anymore. Alex didn't get it. Why would she, or any woman, keep at it, day in, day out, when she could stay at home and not have to bother with customers or rules or any of it? It had to be easier, didn't it? Her husband had died, though, and she was a bit old to have babies. Obsolete, his dad called women like her sanctuary dwellers. He'd said she didn't have a man to do everything for her, so she would have to do it for herself, really. But even still, normal women with husbands had men to do the hard work for them, like his mum did. His man would be sitting at the table, too, when his dad was talking the talk. Listening, head down, never questioning what he was saying. She would have if she thought he was wrong, though, right? His mum always agreed with him, even when she was crying. She cried a lot, but he knew that women were overly emotional. His dad said it's the hormones, especially when they are pregnant. Then, as quickly as the thought came, he pushed it away, trying to smother it with a mental shrug. Nah, they don't get what it's like for us. Dad's right. But a small part of him couldn't help feeling that Mrs. Turnbull did know something. Something he didn't understand. And that unsettled him, left him fidgeting with the edges of his hoodie, looking for something to grab onto, even if it was just another shelf to stack. As Alex was about to slip his earbuds back in, he noticed a woman entering the store, her steps shaky. Her eyes darted around, lingering on the aisles before settling on the counter where Mrs. Turnbull stood, carefully stacking receipts. Alex frowned. He could see faint dried mud stains on the back of the woman's blouse and dark, fingerprint-like shapes starting to form along her neck. She approached the counter, each step tentative, as if expecting to be turned away before she could even speak. "Excuse me," she said in a low, strained voice. I need emergency contraception." Mrs. Turnbull's eyes softened but immediately steeled. She glanced over at Alex, who pretended to be fiddling with a shelf, but was listening closely. She lowered her voice, trying to keep her tone gentle but firm. "I'm afraid we require the husband to fill in the consent form for that now. It's the new regulation. I'm sorry." Alex blinked, confused. "Wait, what? You actually need your husband to approve that?" Mrs. Turnbull gave a short nod, her voice firm yet tinged with regret. "We've spoken about this before, Alex. It's the law. They're forcing us to follow these rules. It's not my decision." The woman froze, her eyes wide as if she had slapped her. She opened her mouth to speak but closed it again like she was trying to find the words that wouldn't make it all worse. The woman's lips trembled. She glanced over her shoulder almost instinctively before leaning closer. The woman's voice cracked. It's an emergency. He's out of town and I really need it. I can't." She trailed off, swallowing hard. "Please, you have to understand." Mrs. Turnbull's gaze lingered on the bruises for a fraction of a second, her jaw tightening. "I'm very sorry, but I can't sell it to you without the proper authorization." Her voice wavered, regret etched into every word. "I don't have a choice." Mrs. Turnbull's eyes momentarily flicked upwards, highlighting the distinctive red flashing dot of a security camera. "It's the law." For a long moment neither of them spoke. The woman was staring down at the counter, her hands shaking now, and Mrs. Turnbull felt that familiar knot in her stomach, one that had been tightening over the last year. The sense of powerlessness, the sense that everything she did felt like it didn't matter. She knew the law was meant to break women down, to keep them dependent, to keep them in check. But this was something else. Something cruel. The woman bit her lip, looking as if she might collapse under the weight of what the refusal could mean for her future. "I'm sorry," she said again, though she wasn't sure if she was apologizing to the woman or to herself. She was just so tired of feeling like this was the only reality they had. The woman blinked, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. I can't. I just..." She paused, shaking her head, then backed away from the counter in defeat. "Never mind. Forget I asked." Mrs. Turnbull sighed heavily, shoulders slumping as if all the air had gone out of her. She'd seen this scenario before. Women coming in desperate, needing the pills, but too afraid to make a scene. Too afraid to even ask for the things they needed on most occasions. This woman needed a hospital, a sympathetic police officer, and justice, but she would get none of that. And to make matters worse, she couldn't even help herself. She turned, catching Alex's eye with a brief, weary glance. He felt the conflict in that look, saw how much she'd wanted to help, but couldn't. The bitter taste of helplessness filled Alex's mouth like copper, sharp and metallic as if he'd bitten his own tongue. He knew what emergency contraception was. He learned about it in school before any of this started. Back then, he was sure girls could get it from the school nurse if they needed it, And it was free. It was used for accidents, broken condoms, forgotten pills and whatnot. His dad said those girls were sluts, trying to escape the consequences of their actions. Escape, Alex thought, and for a second the word didn't sit right in his chest. He remembered hearing his dad say it, how it was just another way for women to dodge responsibility. But weren't accidents a part of life? He understood it took two to have sex. It wasn't just the woman's fault. Was it? He clenched his fists, feeling a ripple of doubt surge through him. Aren't both people responsible? But then the thought was gone, buried under the weight of his father's voice in his head, reminding him that women were the ones who had to bear the consequences. What happened after wasn't for him, as a man, to worry about. Women were there to please, not that he knew anything about that on a personal level. He watched the woman leave, defeated, from the corner of his eye. Her steps were slow and her face pale, her eyes downcast, told a story Alex wasn't sure he could piece together, but he knew that whatever had happened to her wasn't an accident. His dad might have wished illegal contraception into reality, but there were still laws against other things like rape. At least that's what Alex had been told. He wanted to believe that, he had to, but the doubt gnawed at him, bitter and unrelenting. He knew because of a woman's lower status in society, proving anything like that was almost impossible. If you can do something wrong and know with certainty you're not going to get punished, what's stopping you? He thought. He had never experienced sex before. His mates had, but he was too awkward to ever meet someone. He certainly had the money for the chocolates and the flowers needed for sex, now that the cuts they had made to women's pay had gone on to the men's hourly rate, but he lacked the communication skills. A disgusting thought crossed his mind like a thunder headache. If he ever got desperate, he could just do it. The thought was vile, an impulse that repulsed him as much as it startled him. He forced it down, like swallowing something bitter, but it still lurked in his mind, lingering like a shadow. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to focus instead on the woman's face as she'd left the pharmacy. Her eyes hollow, a bruise already darkening along her neck. That image stuck with him, stirring up something that felt uncomfortably close to guilt. His dad had always said it was women who tried to escape responsibility, who used contraception to cover up their mistakes. But something didn't feel right. Something told Alex that she wasn't escaping anything. She was simply trying to survive. But then he heard his father's voice, like an anchor dragging him back. His dad always said women are weaker. They can't handle their own messes. She could have avoided the mess she found herself in if she had been more careful. The law backed up his theory now anyway, solidifying everything his father had taught him. It wasn't just his father's way anymore. It was the country's way. Maybe it was right, he thought uneasily. Maybe they really did need men to keep them in line, to help them help themselves. And yet, he couldn't shake that woman's face. He didn't know what he believed anymore. The guilt, the law, his father's voice, they all seemed to blur together, leaving him somewhere in the middle, caught between what he'd been taught and the doubt gnawing at him, bitter and unrelenting. As the door closed behind her, the bell tinkled with the finality of Mrs. Turnbull's decision. Alex felt a twist of something sharp in his chest, helplessness maybe, or just a dull anger he didn't quite know what to do with. He wanted to say something, anything that would soften the harshness of it all, but every word he thought of sounded clumsy or empty. He turned to Mrs. Turnbull, searching deep in his mind for something wise or comforting. She was looking down, straightening the stacks of receipts with shaking hands, her face tense and set. Alex knew she was just following the law, but still, he thought she must feel the weight of it too. He looked her in the eyes, hoping she could see some kind of solidarity there, a sense that he understood, even if he didn't, not fully. Finally, he took a breath, leaned in a little, and spoke softly. "Bruh." For a second, he thought she might not understand, but he stood by it, his face full of earnestness. Yeah, he thought, that should help. Alex stood there for a moment, his words hanging awkwardly in the air like a bad smell. Mrs. Turnbull didn't flinch. didn't respond. She just nodded to herself, turned on her heel, and headed toward the storage cupboard. Her footsteps faded as she disappeared behind the door, leaving Alex to stew in the uncomfortable silence. The door clicked shut behind her. The pharmacy was quiet now, the only sound the hum of the lights overhead. Alex, feeling the weight of his own awkwardness, glanced at the clock perched above the ominous security camera. "Shit, I'm late." Alex muttered the words under his breath as he yanked his hoodie on, the fabric slipping over his head in a hurry. He glanced at the clock again. 5:16, his pulse picking up a little. He needed to leave, and fast. Just as he reached for the door, something in the back of his mind made him pause. Turning back, he crept behind the counter. Mrs. Turnbull was guarding not 2 minutes ago. With a quick look towards the storage cupboard door, he slipped behind the curtain, out of sight. Then, in an almost casual movement, he reappeared from behind the counter, his expression neutral. He tugged his hoodie down a little more, suddenly a bit too aware of the weight in his pocket, but he shook it off. "All right, Toodles," he called out to Mrs. Turnbull, his usual end-of-shift signal. He paused, waiting, the silence stretching a little longer than usual until 2 faint knocks echoed from the storage room door. It was a small acknowledgement, good enough for him. With a last glance around, he slipped out the front door. He gripped the weight in his pocket as bounced gently. He stepped out into the cold air, feeling both relieved and oddly unsettled.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for listening. That was the second chapter of my new novel, What Remains of Us. The full novel is available to buy now on Amazon, and it's free to read with Kindle Unlimited. You can also find it through most good online retailers. I've popped the links in the description below. I'll be posting the entire book here, chapter by chapter, so you can listen to the whole thing for free. This channel is something I'm building in my spare time, with the hope that one day I can turn my writing into a full-time career. Everything you hear is written by me, and if you'd like to support the journey, I've set up a Patreon too, links in the description. Thanks again for being here. If you enjoyed the story, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing. It really helps more than you know. See you in the next chapter.